This is ContraZoom, where we go back and forth about film. I'm your host, Dakota Arsenault. On today's show, we are continuing our A24 retrospective. This is our 21st edition of the series, and you can listen to recent episodes 232, A24 Retrospective Son of a Gun, 224, A24 Retrospective A Most Violent Year, or go all the way back to 108, A History of A24 Films, to get the full backstory of the company. Today we are looking at the 2014 film, 2015 film, While We Were Young, directed by Noah Baumbach. The film stars Ben Stiller and Naomi Watts as a middle-aged couple who get rejuvenated when they befriend young hipsters, played by Adam Driver and Amanda Seyfried. I want to welcome back to the show, Bil Antoniou. Bill is the host of the Bad Gay Movies podcast and writes the monthly blog post, The Criterion Shelf, found on that shelf. Bill was last heard on episode 231, Best Films of 2022, talking about his favorite movie from last year, Tar. Welcome back to the show, Bill. How are you?
Always a pleasure and an honor to be asked to be on the show. Thank you for having me. I am very well, Dakota.
Amazing. I'm so happy to have you. And it's funny. As I said, now this is our 21st edition of this series, and I cannot believe that it has taken this long to have you specifically on, because you are, and I apologize to all my other favorite guests, one of my favorite guests.
Oh, thanks. Well, you're my second favorite Dakota in the whole world, so that's great.
Wow, that's so nice of you.
Yeah, my first is Meryl's houseboy in Death Becomes Her. You know, when she's knocking on the
Yes.
door. Dakota.
Dakota.
That's who you were named after, right?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I'm
yeah.
definitely younger than Death Becomes Her.
Yeah, absolutely. No, you haven't had me on because you know I'm better than you and it bothers you, and it took you this long to just get up the gumption.
Yeah, every time you send me a note, it puts you down a rung where I'm like, next time I'll invite Bill. Oh, nope, he sent me another note. Never mind.
I told you I won't do it anymore. It's just funny when a guy named Arsenault can't pronounce French names. It makes me laugh, and I have to share my joy with you. That's all. It
is pretty funny and more than a little ironic.
Yeah, the movie's called Le Pupille, by the way. Yeah, anyway.
All right. Well, since this is your first time on the A24 retrospective series, as is tradition, I'm going to ask you our A24 4 questions. And so to start things off, number one, what are your top 3 A24 films?
Well, first of all, I want to say my best friend recently was telling me how he thinks A24 fans are like the Marvel fans of the art house world, which made me laugh, and I can't stop thinking about it. And I've been thinking about it since you asked me to be on the show. No, he's not wrong, but you know, it's all wonderful. Anyway, my top 3 A24 films. Looking over the list, I was surprised at how many movies I didn't realize were A24 films. But I would have to go in, I guess, reverse order. I would start with A Most Violent Year, which you recently talked about. I like all of J.C. Chandor. Is that his name?
I say Chandor, but I don't know.
Right. I've never heard it out loud, so we could. Who knows who's right? Let's just say me, because it's always me.
Sure.
Yeah. No, I think that's a marvelous film. I like all of his films. I thought All Is Lost was like the best movie of that year, and then A Most Violent Year is just. It touches, I mean, everyone can listen to your wonderful episode about it, but it touches on genres in a familiar way while at the same time being unlike anything I've ever seen before. So I really like that film. Number 2, I would say The Lighthouse, because Eggers is another one who I like everything that he does. For all that you can say about The Northman and its compromises, I'm currently wearing my Northman t-shirt, actually. I still think it's a cut above other movies of its kind. I find that there are Robert Eggers people and there are Ari Aster people, and I know which one I am. And I think The Lighthouse is just extraordinary. Again, taking something and I love the fact that he roots his movies in a historical research. They're based in something real, and then he takes a fanciful possibility and goes all the way with it. You know, like everything in The Witch was, straight out of everything that I knew about that time period. And I've been to Salem a few times. I've done all the museums and the research and all that stuff. And it really is accurate to it. And then at the end, you're like, oh my God, is he going to go there? And he does. And in The Lighthouse, it's the same, like sea serpents and, all that stuff. And watching Robert Pattinson masturbate to like a, what is it, like a little wood carving, you know, it's my night it's my night at the movies, basically. My number one would have to be The Lobster by Yorgos Lanthimos. I was not a huge fan of his until I saw this movie. Or at least I didn't feel like I quite got him until I saw this movie. So there was a joke to Dogtooth that I didn't get, maybe because it's a parody of overprotective Greek parents. And since I have those, it hit too close to home. I don't know. And Alps was okay, but the Lobster I just thought was a masterpiece. That brittle world of, what am I saying? That sort of, that level of humor that it has that is not quite satirical, but it's not quite serious either. And he masters it and he maintains it so beautifully throughout that whole film. And he has actors who completely understand his world perfectly as well. And I've just enjoyed everything he's done since. But I think The Lobster will probably be the masterpiece of his for me. And it's a movie I can watch anytime. I love it so much.
There's a reason why we're such good friends. And this is the reason. Like, those
that
are
I let
some
you
of my
think that we're good
ones.
friends? Yes, that's
Yes.
the reason. Yes.
We are such good internet friends, Bill. and these three movies are some of my favorites as well. I'm so happy you named them. Yeah. All terrific picks. No notes.
No notes.
No notes. All right. Question number 2. What was your introduction to A24?
Well, it was, I guess, unbeknownst to me, because when I was looking at their list of releases, I saw that their second was Ginger and Rosa. Did you guys do an episode on that one? Now I can't remember.
We did, yes. And
Okay,
you
you
had
did.
sent me a note afterwards, as you do, wondering why I didn't like it as much.
Oh, I did? Wow, that's shitty even for me. That's amazing.
Yeah.
I really like that film, but I'm a huge Sally Potter fan. I mean, I've been devoted to her ever since I saw Orlando as a slip of a 15-year-old. I don't remember knowing that it was an A24 film. So that would have been my introduction to them without realizing it. I saw that film in the theater. I think I saw it at like a press screening, like a 10 a.m. press screening. And then Sally Potter came to TIFF, to the Lightbox, I should say, for one of those like in conversation with things.
Mhm.
And I got to go to that and I got to ask her a question, which was really cool. And she talked about her whole career. I don't know that Ginger and Rosa is like the highlight of her career, but I think it's a pretty solid entry. But it's been a while. I don't know. Maybe if I watch it again, I won't like it as much. But she has a world that I'm always keyed into, and I probably forgive her flawed work more than a non-fan would. Let's just say that.
Interesting. Do you
But
remember what you had asked her?
I did, yeah. Just that she talked about all of her films except one, which was The Man Who Cried, with Johnny Depp and Christina Ricci. And maybe I shouldn't have asked her about it. Like, maybe it was left out on purpose. I don't know, because I just said, oh, we haven't, the interviewer hasn't asked you about The Man Who Cried. And I really like that film. I was just wondering if you could talk about making that. And she got very guarded about it. So basically what happened, that was her first time working with a bigger studio. Her films are very indie, even for British art house films. And that was her first time working with, I believe Harvey Weinstein was actually one of the executive producers on that film, and working with a lot of big stars and a big studio. And she basically briefly said it wasn't a great experience for her. And then I read more about it later and found out that she actually was forced to cut maybe 40 minutes out of the final cut. So I think that whole thing was just, she probably doesn't look at it as her film, which is probably why it won't come up in a retrospective. So it was probably not very politic of me to bring it up, but I asked in as non-douchey a way as I could, and she answered in a very polite way. She wasn't like edgy with me or anything. More like I brought up a bad memory and I felt bad for doing so. But I really like that film. I was one of maybe 5 people who saw it, but whatever the result was, I enjoyed it. She probably spent most of it listening to Harvey Weinstein screaming at her on the phone the entire time.
Probably.
So
Yeah.
it was probably not a good memory. But anyway, to get back to your actual question, my introduction to A24 technically would have been Ginger and Rosa, but I became aware of them as a brand around the time of like Hereditary. When people started making memes and like jokey Twitter memes about what A24 movies look like, what they all have in common, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's something that probably a lot of people went through where they probably saw, 3, 4, 5 films from them, and then it wasn't until around that time, 2016 or so, where it was like, oh, hey, I've actually have seen quite a few of their films without realizing it.
Yeah, and I wonder if it's just because they didn't promote it as hard, or I don't know, maybe the logo wasn't quite as flashy at the time. I don't know. Or sometimes it just takes a while to realize, to get to know a film company, a brand.
I would say, yeah. And going through this in chronological order, I definitely am noticing that where early on it was just sort of buy whatever we can and sort of figure out what our ethos is as we go.
Yeah.
I'm speaking the royal we as in A24. For
sure,
and it wasn't really until a little bit after where we're at right now where they really try to find their brand identity, and to the point where we know what they are now. Yeah,
because usually these companies start out as straight distributors where they're just picking things up from film festivals, whatever Harvey Weinstein leaves for them to buy back in those days. And then if they're successful and they grow, they become more involved in production. So I wonder if, especially, I mean, they just swept the Oscars, which, considering how little effort they put into the Oscars, is pretty amazing. And I wonder if this means, if they're at that place that Miramax was at in the mid 90s, where they're going to suddenly become more of a big name producer, where the indie label is only going to be technically correct, but not actually. Yeah,
for sure. Okay. Question number 3, and I'm very eager to hear your answer for this, because I don't think anyone has a better encyclopedia for film than you do, Bill.
Oh, that's very kind. Thank you.
What director, dead or alive, would make a good A24 film in your opinion?
I have 2, and I think maybe someone already picked one of them. So I'm going to go with the one I'm pretty sure no one's picked before, which would be Georges Franju. So his most famous film is probably The Eyes Without a Face, from the early 60s, which is a wonderful mad scientist movie about a guy who keeps trying to cut off girls' faces to put on his daughters, to restore her face after a car accident. If you've never seen it, it's in the Criterion collection, so it's definitely available. He also made a really, really wonderful film called Judex, which is it's like a heist movie involving magicians, and it's almost like an early 50s superhero movie. Every scene is like a different thing. And I think that's a very A24 film for France in the 50s, just because of the way it crosses genres and is just even 60 years later, unlike anything you've ever seen. So I think his sort of perverse idea of horror and science fiction and human drama would make him a perfect fit for A24.
That's a fantastic answer. I've only seen Eyes Without a Face from him, and the fact that we still see the reverberations of that film on the horror community today, and the way it influences up and coming directors, it would be nothing out of place to have his films in the A24 brand.
For sure. I think those are the only 2 films I've seen, and I've seen a couple of shorts, but I think those are the 2 that are most widely available. Pedro Almodovar's The Skin I Live In, I feel, takes a lot from The Eyes Without a
100%,
Face as well. Yeah.
Okay, and then the last question, the most philosophical one, what makes an A24 film in your opinion?
Well, something like what I was just saying, pushing genres to their sort of kinky extreme corners, like you think you've seen horror, but you've never seen it quite like this. But it's not about overindulgence. It's about exploring specific possibilities. So, like, I've never saw that movie Lamb, but I feel like that's a very emblematic idea of a A24 film. Or Hereditary, where a lot of things about that movie don't quite work for me, but the things that work extremely well. And the fact that it's so deeply unsettling, and it's never like the Hollywood version of Satanism, for instance. It feels like the real, like the truly deeply disturbing aspect of it. So I think ultimately, if I was going to pick one word, it would be independence in the truest meaning of the word, which is that there is a sense of, I mean, Netflix apparently gives its directors a lot of independence, but they give them too much, and their movies are always like 25 minutes too long. So there's clearly something holding people to a higher standard at A24, but there is a sense that the imagination can go somewhere it's never gone before. It doesn't feel, and I'm sure this isn't true because it's movie making, but it doesn't feel like someone's saying, this isn't what people pay for. Make it more like what people pay for.
Yeah. And I think, recent example, Everything Everywhere All at Once is a case in point of that.
Yeah. 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 My favorite movie of the year. Just kidding.
Yeah, I know. I know you had some issues with it, to put it mildly.
I don't have issues with it. It's just not for me, really. Yeah. I don't want to inspire any other correction emails from your listeners. It's just it's probably a really great movie, and it's just not for me. I sat in the movie theater feeling old, and it felt good for the first time in my whole life, basically, which is that you kids enjoy this. I'm going to go take an Advil because I have a migraine.
And that's why we bring you on the show for those great sound bites.
Yeah. Which brings us to our film.
I really loved your film. It was that scene with the dogs around the garbage. How did you stage that?
I said, hey, shoot those dogs.
Beautiful. You want to come get a bite with us?
Why do you suddenly want to hang out with a couple of 25-year-olds?
We were just 25. I mean, we weren't, but, it'll be fun. We met this interesting couple.
What's the rumpish, rednecks?
I like how engaged they are and everything.
It's like their apartment is full of everything we once threw out, but it looks so good the way they have it. Being around them energizes you.
It's infectious.
Are you kidding me? Watch it. I love you.
Yes. Yeah. And interestingly enough, While We Were Young, I believe, was my introduction to A24.
Oh.
But yeah, this film was director Noah Baumbach's 8th that he had made. He was known for the indie classics like Kicking and Screaming, The Squid and the Whale, and Margot at the Wedding. After While We're Young came out, he had the hit Marriage Story, which was nominated for 6 Oscars and won Best Supporting Actress for Laura Dern. In the film, While We're Young, it is centered around Ben Stiller's character Josh, a documentarian who is having a midlife crisis along with his wife Cornelia, played by Watts. All their friends their age are having kids, and they couldn't feel more in limbo. They meet the young hipster couple, Jamie and Darby, Driver and Seyfried, respectively, as they are auditing a continuing education class that Josh teaches, and the two couples hit it off and become friends. Things that were old and uncool to the middle-aged people are suddenly bespoke and vintage to the younger generation. As their friendship evolves, Josh starts to believe that Jamie might not be as honest and spontaneous as he seems. The film premiered at TIFF in 2014, and A24 paid $4 million for the distribution rights. They were eager to release the film after losing out on the rights to Baumbach's previous film, Frances Ha. This is going to be a spoiler-filled episode, so if you've not watched the film, we suggest doing so first. This is the first of 3 Baumbach films so far that A24 have released, so we will be spending more time with the director in the future. So, Bill, does the movie that takes place at the tail end of the hipster movement with a cynical eye on art and youth have something meaningful to say, or is it all bitterness masquerading as comedy?
I don't think it's a bitter movie at all. It somewhat spoke to me when I first saw it, because if it came out in 2015, then I was not 40 yet.
Yeah, you would have been just a bit younger than, I guess, the Ben Stiller and Naomi Watts couple.
No, I'm just a bit younger than him. Actually, I'm just a bit older than him now, because he says he's 44 and I'm 46 now. So I would have been about 38. So I'm already feeling the pinch of like not being the youth at 38, but not quite the way I do now. So the movie actually hit me a lot harder watching it again. And I'm so happy I did, because I always really liked it and I always meant to rewatch it. But I don't think it's bitter at all. I don't know that I needed them to adopt a Haitian baby in order to show that there's like wholeness happening at the end. But no, I think he has his big freak out at the end at the ceremony, and it's all about him having ignored his emotional issues and therefore needing to face them. And like it's not about the evils of the young, because I can't speak today. He realizes that the young people aren't actually evil like he feared. They're just misguided and stressed out, basically.
Yeah, I think that's a fair way of putting it. I would have been ever so slightly older than the young couple when this movie came out, and probably more in line with the actual actor's age. Because I remember reading afterwards that Amanda Seyfried was 28 when she filmed it. She said she actually related more to the Watts character than the character.
Yeah.
But now that I'm a little bit older, it's also sort of funny looking back. I remember watching it the first time and obviously not knowing how the movie is going to play out, just very enamored with this young couple and thinking that they're so cool. And now rewatching it, obviously knowing how it all ends, but right from the very first scene, I'm just like, oh my God, Jamie is so obnoxious. I could not stand being in the same room with him for more than 5 minutes.
Well, that's because you're a productive person. Because the thing with them is, it's not even a generational thing. It's people who feel the pressure to produce versus the people who, I don't know, is it that their moms told them they were perfect, that they think that just their showing up is enough proof that they deserve to be celebrated. And that's probably why Amanda Seyfried probably identified with the older characters from a much younger age, because she's been working since she was a kid. So she's not someone who lives her life being cool in Brooklyn, you know. And there's it's interesting how it captures that sort of hipster culture, especially particularly in they're in Manhattan, right? Or do they live in Brooklyn? I don't even remember. But they live in like the most expensive city in the world, basically. And you have all these young people who, even if they're living 6 people to an apartment, they're still paying through the nose for rent. Like they're kind of embarrassed that they have to be rich to live there. And so they work that much harder to be down to earth and poor. And they, you know, they only buy their $12 teas from like a place that sources it organically or whatever. Like they're living a completely hypocritical life. And that's causing them a great deal of stress, because they also feel like they have to be at the center of things. They have to be it, and they have to be now in order to justify all this effort they're putting into just living their lives, you know.
It's sort of interesting. The Ben Stiller character, Josh, he's this documentarian who's been working on a long gestating project. And, you know, the big punchline of the movie throughout it is he keeps going to film more scenes with this war expert. And every time they film him, he's older and more haggard, and Ben Stiller's facial hair keeps changing. And every time they show a clip from his movie, I just burst out laughing.
Yeah, it's so great.
I have to ask you, as also an artist, do you ever sort of feel a similar struggle of when you're trying to create something, whether you're writing one of your plays or something, you're coming up with a concept of a similar sort of feeling, maybe not to the depths that Josh goes through?
Oh, no, to those depths and more, because I work very slowly. It takes me a long time to get things done. The pandemic has wreaked havoc on my productivity. I am an anxiety sufferer, and that's gotten worse in the last few years. So I very much, I could see myself working on the same documentary. I mean, I've been working on the same novel for like, I don't know, 10, like 5-6 years. Like I've been stuck at the same place for a long time. So I painfully identify, with him. And I appreciate that in this movie, he has his hypocrisy as well. You know, the fact that he believes in this sort of creating something very pure, and he refuses to pitch. He doesn't want to pitch because he thinks he's above the business side of things, which thankfully I don't suffer from. I'm happy to sell out to the first person who will put money in my pocket. So I appreciate that they present this struggle in this really real way without making him a saint for it. You know, no one's a winner in this movie. Everyone's just living their lives. They think that they're on a side, but ultimately they realize that everyone's just like struggling and flailing. And that was actually quite good for me to see again.
Yeah. You have to wonder that if Josh was a real person and had to live through the pandemic, he would have just used that as an excuse to keep editing his film.
Yeah,
and not
absolutely.
turn it in.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like the movie kind of overstates this in using the whole not having a baby yet thing as a symbol of their relationship sort of circling a drain as well. But I don't really mind it. There's nothing in this movie that I mind. I think it's delightful and sharp and funny. And
it's sort of interesting because it's not the first time we've seen a film or some sort of piece of art where it's a couple feeling alienated from their age group because they're not having children, whether because they're choosing not to or they can't. And yet we're seeing this from a bit of an older perspective. And I watched it and I was like, it just seems a little odd that, you know, they're now complaining about their 40-something-year-old friends all having kids. I feel like they should have gone through this crisis at least a decade earlier.
They would have, except I think that when you do live in Manhattan and your rent is $6,000 a month, you have to keep putting off having a kid to wait to afford it. And I think that's probably a phenomenon of his generation.
Yeah, maybe so. Yeah. It's definitely weird seeing Ad Rock from the Beastie Boys, Adam Horowitz, playing a middle-aged, doting, uncool dad.
For sure. Trying so hard to be cool. Yeah.
Yeah, and he actually nails it too, which is the funny part. Where I'm just like, oh yeah, this is the guy who thinks he's the coolest dad.
Yeah, I think the first time I saw it, I was like, why do I know that guy? And I think it was like halfway through that I was like, oh my god, that's the Beastie Boys. Jesus.
Yeah.
I
have always sort of appreciated Baumbach's eye for dialogue. His work with Wes Anderson are probably two of my favorite films from Wes Anderson's filmography that he's co-written. And this is just filled with fantastic one-liners of stuff. Like, I love the scene where he's talking about where they can't remember the name of something, and Ben Stiller goes to look it up, and Adam Driver's like, no, let's just not know it. And like the first time I saw the movie, that blew my mind. Well,
and it was so nice to see something that has moments. I mean, there are moments of outrageous comedy in this, like the ayahuasca ceremony and that wonderful, what's his name? Ryan Serhant, who plays the documentary producer, who is asking him all those lame questions in the pitch, who in real life is like a real estate reality TV show host or something.
Oh my god, really?
Yeah, and like he's like a touch of zaniness as well, and it's so great to see because I think, is this his first movie after Margot at the Wedding, or no, he had another one in between?
No, Frances Ha.
Right. Okay, which I loved. Although I always forget that that's his because we all think of it as a Greta Gerwig movie because he's basically directing her script. But Margot at the Wedding is a really good movie that I'd never want to watch again because it's him at his darkest. It's so, there's no relief in that film. And so it was nice to see him be sharp in his commentary while also lightening up, and actually going to almost dangerous extremes with his humor because he'd never, I don't know that he'd ever gone for such major comedic moments before, maybe Kicking and Screaming. It's been a long time since I've seen that film, but yeah,
I'm by no means a Baumbach completist. I haven't seen Margot at the Wedding. I haven't seen Squid and the Whale. So those
you haven't seen the Squid and the Whale?
No.
Oh, we have to end this podcast right now.
Okay,
I can't believe you've never seen that film. That is,
I know.
My best friend and I became best friends over that movie because when he met me, he's like, "What do you think of the Squid and the Whale?" Like it was like the test that I had to pass, the Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade test I had to pass to know if I was cool enough to hang out. It's a one. I mean, I think it's still his best. It's so good, and it pierces the heart. Like it's so sharp, and I don't know. It's a beautiful, beautiful film. I'm so excited for you that you get to discover it because it's so good.
Well, I will when I do finally watch it. I will let you know, and we'll see if we can be friends then.
It's iffy. I believe I have seen all of his films. And I think Greenberg is the only one that I would say that I outright don't like. And I think that's okay.
Yeah. Baumbach has always sort of had this real sort of devil raging inside him of what side to bring out as far as anger and sadness, and then also he's got the terrific witty personality as well, and that's really on display in movies like this. Marriage Story has some great humor to it as well, and so it's sort of interesting to see how what side will win out when he's working on a movie.
Yeah, I get the impression through his work. I don't know anything about him personally. I get the impression that he isn't afraid to call himself out. And that's what comes through in this film and in Marriage Story as well. I mean, he is probably inspired by what I understand was a pretty nasty divorce in real life and a nasty custody battle. Yeah. And yet that movie, even though it favors the guy's perspective more, like he's on camera more, but at the same time, you don't get the impression that there's no winners in that movie either. And that's how Wes Anderson started as well, who is like a contemporary and a colleague of his. And they wrote at least one movie together. And Wes Anderson used to use his aesthetics to reveal his emotional pain. And I feel like as time has gone on, he's used it more to cover it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assertion. I'm a huge Wes Anderson fan.
I am too. It's just that like Rushmore again touches me somewhere deep. I won't say where it touches me. Just kidding. And Royal Tenenbaums had movie moments that made me weepy, and the Darjeeling Limited as well. And then more and more as time goes on, I feel like I'm just watching him play the hits. I still enjoy it. I think it's very pleasurable. It just he doesn't hit me as deep, and I wonder if we need like a reset with him where he. I don't know. I feel like he's been playing it safe for a long time, and that's okay. But yeah.
Yeah. And he co-wrote 2 movies with Anderson. It was, Life Aquatic and, Fantastic Mr. Fox, which are interestingly enough, my 2 favorite Wes Anderson films.
Understandably so. Fantastic Mr. Fox is him dealing with his daddy issues the best.
Yes, yeah, I love that movie, which is why I love when Wes Anderson does stop motion because he's so good at it.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm trying to look through my notes of stuff, and most of my notes are more the one-liners that I found, funny.
I mean, when he says, "I want to make a film that's both materialist and intellectual at the same time," I mean, like that just gets me. It's so funny. It is so funny.
Yeah.
One question I have though, the movie opens with a misdirect, right? Like we open with the shot of the baby, and we think it's her baby, until we find out it's not. And I wonder. Does that theme carry through? There's a misdirect at the end as well, because we at first think that maybe that baby's theirs before we've realized they're getting on a plane. But is that a theme that carries throughout the film? I meant to think about it throughout the movie and I didn't realize. Other than the fact that they basically mistake these people for people who will be good friends and turn out not to be right for them. But is that something that is thematic throughout the movie?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
It does seem a little tacked on. As far as being the inciting incident of why this couple fights or dissolves their friendship with their other friends that are the same age as them.
Yeah.
And because like you said, it's mentioned at the very beginning, and then they kind of have their fight, and then like every once in a while they're like, oh yeah, by the way, don't forget about this baby couple.
Right.
And they have a scene with them, and then you forget about it. Like, oh yeah, and don't forget about them again.
Yeah.
And then at the very end. So yeah, it's every time it seems a little forced in, even though you understand why the character arc was sort of needed to anchor them to not be too youthful, to sort of ground them with more maturity.
Yeah.
Even if maybe it doesn't quite fit in the overall structure of the film.
Yeah. It captures the struggle of what maybe we still call middle age. I mean, I think that's what I am, because I guess living to 90 is an appropriate age length. And, we live in a world now where being in your 40s doesn't look like it did even when I was a kid, let alone before, right? Like when they talk about how the Sex and the City ladies are older than the Golden Girls were when that show started, like they were only
God, really?
Yeah, they were only in their mid to late 50s when they started on that show. They weren't actually old ladies. And when you think about how, and like Jennifer Lopez is 55, like we allow people to dress a certain way, to maintain themselves a certain way, a lot longer. And also I guess our lifestyle also allows that as well. And how does that affect you? I mean, it's so funny when he goes to the doctor and like the doctor's like, I don't know what you mean by traditional arthritis. Like, that's so funny. Cause he's like, oh, I have like a young person's arthritis, not an old person's arthritis. Like, no, you're in your mid 40s, Yeah. And like my dad gives me crap about losing my hair all the time. And I'm like, Dad, I'm 45. Like that's actually supposed to happen. It just makes you feel old. And that's what, but then I face it too, because I, go around in my t-shirts and jeans and on the inside, I still feel like an idiot 21-year-old. And then I see a photo and I'm like, oh, Jesus Christ, I'm old. And like this movie captures that weird gray area of middle age where it's just like, I still can be hip because I know what's going on in the world. I'm not retired and I'm not in a walker, but I'm also not young. Like what he says about, I have some wingtips in here. I stopped wearing them because they gave me shin splints. Like that's something that happens after a certain age, like that's so funny. So that the perception of that stuff and, and he gives some moments to Naomi Watts too. Like that part where she goes to the hip hop class is so funny, her trying to keep up and be cool in that. It's so great.
It's funny. Watching this movie, I had that exact moment sort of hit me during that scene of the arthritis one, just this past weekend, I went to go get some sunglasses. I was going to use my wife's insurance plan to get them, but I had to get a eye test first in order to prove that they were being to be deducted or whatever it was from her insurance plan. And so I was like, fine, I've got perfect vision. I don't care. I'll do this eye test thing. And of course I go to the doctor, and afterwards they're like, oh, you have a very slight astigmatism.
Right.
And I'm just like, oh God. It's happening. I'm in my mid-30s.
Yeah.
Of course I have a very slight astigmatism now.
And it hits you because it's never happened before. Like, I've been wearing glasses since I was 14, so nothing that happens at the eye doctor is going to upset me, you know. But it'll be like, I'm thankfully, as far as I know, I don't have arthritis. But at some point, I had like tendonitis or something, and that made me feel old a couple of years ago. And so something like that will come along well before I'm ready for it. And I'll have to do it. I'm pretty sure I've reached reading glasses age, so that's okay. Like I do the trombone with my phone all the time. So
that like he does in the movie too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So there's that. Yeah.
I really enjoyed this movie. I think I might have enjoyed it maybe a little bit less than when I first did, because I think the first time I just found the comedy just absolutely hit me in the right spot. And I think now this second time watching it was a little bit like, is that funny? I don't know. This is a little serious, guys. Maybe we should be taking this arthritis stuff a little bit more seriously here. So I don't know if it's just me catching up with the characters and being like, hey guys, this isn't that funny.
Oh no, you're not quite there. I mean, you're in your 30s, I think, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so you're already feeling a divide with people who are in their 20s, but it gets more pronounced. But I also have reached that point where I don't hate young people, and I never really did. But I do feel the way he does at the end all the time, where I'm like, oh, they're just young. You know, when people lecture me about anything or lecture me about my tastes in popular culture, all that stuff, I remember being their age and thinking the way they did as well. And so, yeah. So you trust me, you have fascinating things ahead of you while your body also falls apart at the same time, which is the payback for the calm that you achieve later on.
Excellent. I'm looking forward to that.
No, it does not. Well, yeah, it's also a reminder of death though. So it's not too much to look forward to. Yeah.
Of course. I want to talk a little bit about Jamie's sort of documentary angle. Mm-hmm. Do you think that sort of works, this whole idea of, obviously we said at the top we're going to spoil things, but it turns out that he's sort of staging his documentaries. Did that play out organically enough for you? Was the payoff all sort of there, or did it just sort of, kind of come on a little fast towards the end?
It does it comes on a little fast. The logic of it was a little bit lost on me, or is it just because watching movies at home I'm distracted and I miss key points or something? Because I kind of get it. But I also wonder if we're not supposed to be there with Ben Stiller in terms of the level of outrage that he has over it, because he is such a ridiculous purist. And he is a purist to the point of it being impractical because he won't do pitches. I don't know. I wonder if, and maybe because it's 2015, I wonder if Jamie should have been working harder to break into reality TV or something a little bit more obvious about the soullessness of what he does. So yes, it makes sense in that once they do a bit of exposition in the dialogue a few times to make sure I understand why he's upset. And when I hear it, I'm like, okay, I get it. But yeah, there was something that felt a little bit glided over. I wonder if there was 3 extra scenes that he cut for time or something that made it a less obscure.
It does sort of feel like there may be something missing, whether it's a line or two, or maybe an entire scene that sets it up a little bit better. Because you're right, we sort of get the full understanding of the frustration of Josh, and we know where he's coming from. And yes, his idea of purism is a little silly, and we're able to kind of laugh at that because his father-in-law mocks him for that as well. Yeah. And we sort of get that whole concept, and also the idea of not wanting to share credit and all this sort of stuff. Josh is such a fully formed character that all makes sense.
Yeah.
But then, it does sort of come on a little quickly as far as the Jamie aspect of, he goes from making these, silly little shorts of who's the most famous person you have in your phone, to straight up, lying and manipulating.
Well, and sitting at the table. Like, that documentary is done before we realize it as well. And that's also what makes me wonder if there were scenes cut out, because we just see him do that one interview with Brady Corbett, and then the documentary is done. And maybe there's just a feeling of the process that's not quite fleshed out enough for me. I don't know. It all feels a bit rushed. By the way, I could do an entire episode just talking about Charles Grodin. I love that performance so much as this sort of Frederick Wiseman-esque documentarian. And again, talk about someone who captures that perfectly brittle style of comedy where he's on the verge of being silly, but he never actually is. Just and perfectly cast as somebody who would be intimidating to an insecure person, because he's probably never thinking about you, but he always seems like he's making fun of you when he talks to you, you know?
Yeah, there's that great scene where Josh goes to get feedback of his unfinished documentary, and he goes to put a kettle on, and he's basically screaming over top of the kettle, but he's never actually raising his voice.
Yeah.
Like his voice gets louder, but he's not raising the register.
Well, and Josh is not cluing into the parts that prove that he is there to support him. Like, he just sat through 7 hours of footage or whatever it is. Like, this 80-year-old man sat on a couch for 7 hours to watch your thing. Like, just the fact that he watched the whole thing should be telling you that he's actually there to help you. And but he's also someone who's been doing his job forever. He has probably won an award at every film festival around the world, so nothing's precious to him. Nothing is like, you know, and he's just gonna shoot straight, which is, your film is too long. You don't have you need to shape it into something more interesting. Like, he's basically telling you don't have a narrative, you just have information, and that's not a film. You have to come up with a story, basically. And Josh can't handle the truth, because it's just coming at him without any cushioning, whatever, you know, while as Naomi Watts, because she's his wife and she loves him, she hasn't been giving it to him straight. Yeah.
And there's that fantastic scene at the end where he finally goes to his editor and he goes, "Oh, we're going to cut this part." He goes, "Great." And it's just this, like, without missing a beat. And you know that his editor has been sitting on that thought for months and months and being like, I just got to tell him to cut this bit out because it doesn't work.
Yeah. I wonder if Noah Baumbach is, like, worried. Are people just being nice to me, you know, when they say something is good? Because we all worry about that. Anybody who creates anything, you know, you're telling your friends, like, please be honest, but are they being honest? And do I really want them to be honest? I mean, that's a constant struggle.
Please be honest, but tell me you love it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And anytime an artist makes art about art, you have to sort of automatically assume is it sort of an analogy for themselves. And so you wonder if Josh struggling to, you know, keep his ideas in check and not get too unwieldy, is that Noah Baumbach sort of feeding his own dragon of, like, you know, when I'm writing, I sometimes, you know, go in entire tangents that completely misshape the story, and I need to find a way to self-edit and rein this in, and maybe someone like Greta Gerwig, his partner, helps him with that and all that sort of stuff. So you have to wonder if maybe Josh is the, if you want to call it the Woody Allen character in the movie.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, Woody is someone I think about a lot, particularly watching this film. And I remember watching it in the theater and just being so grateful to see people sitting around tables in New York City talking, because it's a kind of movie that I love. And it's a kind of movie that Woody hasn't, you know, aside from the, you know, the disaster of his public persona, and just in terms of his movies, they haven't been good at that in a very, very long time. You know, he has withdrawn from the public world since the first scandal in the 90s. And so he's not out talking to people. He's an old man. So all of his movies are now period pieces or repeats of the same philosophical quandaries that earlier movies were. You need to go back to stuff from the 70s and 80s to watch him doing also great movies about, like, people sitting around talking in New York cafes. So that aspect of it, and I know that Baumbach is inspired by him. Anybody who, like, my age is inspired by him. So that's an aspect of the film that I really, really appreciate. But then the later stuff about the generations and stuff, that goes further away from Woody's movies and into something else.
Yeah, I agree with that there. I don't know. This is sort of a movie that's a little tricky to break down, because there isn't really a lot to talk about.
Yeah, other than just what I like about it, basically. Like, it's not a movie that I feel compelled to deconstruct in any careful or controversial way. Like, it's just something that I really, really enjoy. I enjoy it so deeply. Yeah. And I love the casting in it. It's the most appealing that Ben Stiller's ever been, because he's someone who I find his style of comedy is intentionally obnoxious. And, I don't mind him. I don't dislike him. He's just not someone I gravitate towards, especially a lot of his comedies are very like bro-y, comedies, and they're just not made for me. And this is the most endearing he's ever been. Particularly because of how much I identify with the character. And so it's the performance of his that I enjoy the most after maybe the Royal Tenenbaums. And Naomi Watts as well. I mean, of course she's very beautiful, and she's very, an aspirational Hollywood movie star. You know, she's thin and she's blonde and she's incredibly talented, but she also looks like someone who exists in the real world that I could possibly know. And like, her exasperation with him, it feels organic. Like, I get the impression that they've been married for a long time. They're both just wonderful in it. And Charles Grodin and Amanda Seyfried as well. Like, and Adam Driver, like, there's a reason we have to believe that they would fall in love with this couple. They can't just be obnoxious, millennials. And I think they're millennials. And, you know, he is so good at being too cool for school. And she's so genuinely lovely. And so that aspect of it works as well. The casting of it works very well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I sort of appreciate that Baumbach doesn't dismiss the couple specifically because they are millennials. You know, I'm a millennial as well. And I know that's sort of like the catch-all boomer term for anyone that they believe is a young person, which is not the case anymore, because millennials are now, you know, in their late 30s to mid 20s, basically.
Yeah.
That's sort of,
I mean, when I did a Google search, I found out that I'm apparently an elder millennial, although I don't think that that's true. That at least not.
I guess you would kind of be in the middle of Gen X and millennial, wouldn't you?
Yeah, they call us the Oregon Trail generation because we're old enough to remember an analog world, but we were young enough to take to the digital world easily. Like, I don't have any issues with technology the way that a lot of older people claim to. Yeah, he doesn't point out their hypocrisies in any cruel way. Like, Adam Driver's character, Jamie, is always talking about being real. And we have that magnificent montage of, like, you know, he's listening to records and Ben Stiller's got his iPod, that sort of thing. But then when they're together, Ben Stiller's got his face in his phone texting the entire time. So it's like he's completely full of shit because he does use technology. This is the hipster thing, right? Which is that you're faking being a man of the woods when actually your ecological footprint is ginormous. And he includes that without pointing it out in any cruel way. He's not, Baumbach doesn't hate anybody that he creates in this world.
Yeah, and I think that's a very nice thing, because it very easily could have just been, you know, I find the movie's a little bit cynical, maybe a bit more cynical than you find it. But he very easily could have been like, young people bad, older people good.
Yeah. I mean, I think it is a cynical movie. It's just that there's a feeling of forgiveness about it, because this is just the quilt that is New York of human life, right? All these millions of people living on top of each other and struggling to get by. And there's that wonderful moment where she says at the end, the whole world isn't a conspiracy about against you, which is particularly when you get to my age, it gets harder to believe that that's not true. You have this instinct to feel like the whole world is a conspiracy against you, and you have to like maintain your equilibrium and your common sense to realize it's really not.
Now, that said, do you believe that Jamie, obviously it was Jamie and Darby, but do you believe Jamie specifically audited Josh's class because he knew who he was and who he was married to?
He probably plays checkers more than chess. So he probably didn't have some kind of Dr. Evil scheme going on. He probably just was like walking by and saw a posting or saw that his friend was going, and on that day decided to take advantage of that moment. I think he's just someone who is an opportunist in the least nefarious understanding of that word, which is that he just sort of follows his instincts that way. So yes and no, basically. And I think that the reason why Ben Stiller forgives him at the end is because he knows that Jamie doesn't really have what it takes, and the world will find out soon enough. Why be the one to do it, you know?
Yeah, but sort of on the flip side, I guess I'll start with my theory is I sort of am along your lines a little bit, but I could see that, you know, maybe he saw a poster or he already goes to this school or whatever it is and recognized the name of the director and goes, oh, this is an easy chance to make a networking connection because this is someone already of note in this community that I sort of vaguely want to be a part of. That said, on the flip side, you know, he kind of wins in the end because they're at the airport and they're flipping through a magazine and he's got an interview and a Sundance profile. So he's clearly getting some sort of recognition. Yeah,
he's having a good year, but does that necessarily mean it's going to stick around? I mean, look at the movies that won Sundance in the early 90s during the indie revolution. Sure. Like, not everybody stuck around. And within a few years, Quentin Tarantino destroyed everything and everything became a Tarantino, everything became about imitating him. So... you know, it remains to be seen if Jamie's going to be able to take this moment and stretch it out into a career, or if he's just trendy and he's what people are into right now. And then once they realize that that's the only game he's got, that they might get sick of him, you know. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, the movie is somewhat forgiving of him because why shouldn't he be smart at knowing who the people are to get to know? I mean, it's an impossible business to be successful in. Why not have clever tricks up your sleeve for getting your foot in the door?
Mm-hmm. And I'm sure you probably know more than a few people who it would not be above them at all to look up who someone is and figure out what their connections are and sort of play that to your benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. And more power to them. I mean, I've always been too lazy for that sort of thinking. I have a real problem, which is that all I'd ever do is follow my passions. Like, I wrote plays because I love doing it and I perform in them because I love doing it. I keep forgetting to sort of strategize my career in order to become more successful, and then found myself doing, you know, indie theater in Toronto for 20 years because I was just really happy doing it. I sound like really precious describing it that way, but the truth is I just forget to do anything other than have a good time. And so I admire the people who are more calculating than that. And I know some people who have done it who have a lot to offer talent-wise, and so good for them for getting it out there. And I know some people who don't, and I don't know, whatever. If that's how you want to spend your time, go right ahead.
You sort of fall on a completely different spectrum from both Josh and Jamie, because Jamie is obviously super calculating and trying to figure out what moves he needs to make, whether or not he's smart about them or not. And then on the flip side, you've got Josh, who doesn't even remember what it's like to enjoy making art anymore. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, because he's sort of lost in his ego. And again, he's in denial about the fact that he's no longer young and up and coming. I mean, when he was first getting into documentaries, he probably also had everyone, you know, rolling out the red carpet for him and throwing grant money his way. And then he went out of style and he didn't notice it. And I think obsessing over this one project that he never completes is a great way to avoid that reality of the fact that he's no longer hip. Because time does not have to move on if he doesn't complete that project. Mm-hmm. Yeah. During his interview with his pitch meeting with the hedge fund manager, about halfway through his spiel, I was just like, what the fuck is he talking about? And then sure enough, the very next line, the hedge fund manager is just like, I don't understand what you're talking about.
I mean, it's so funny.
What's your movie
that
about?
Guy is. It's so funny. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. I thought that was a pretty great conversation. Do you have any last things you kind of want to bring up or talk about in this movie before we get to our games?
No, I think I've revealed all the painful realities of my life in talking about this film. So we're definitely good to move on.
Great. Let's do that. Okay, so the first game that we're going to play is make a double bill pairing, right. And the only rule is that it cannot be another A24 film. So, Bill, what would you pair with While We're Young?
Well, I mean, I talked about Woody earlier, and my first instinct was to pick Manhattan for all that it's, again, very controversial these days. Could people treat it like it's some kind of forensic evidence of some kind? But then, as the movie goes on, I do realize it's actually, it only has aesthetic links to it, not really thematically. So I'm going to go way crazier and say that actually a good double bill pairing is the movie Being Julia by Istvan Jabo with Annette Bening from 2004. That's my favorite Annette Bening performance. And it is also about somebody coming to a crossroads of age that manifests itself through a rivalry with someone younger. In that instance, and as usually happens in stories about generational conflicts, it's through a love triangle, which is that she is, she's a famous actress in the, I want to say turn of the century, or is it the 20s? It's been a minute since I've seen it.
It says 1930s London.
Oh, it is the 30s. Okay. So, and she's a famous stage actress. That's right. It is the 30s because she talks about how she doesn't want to do films. And that's around the time when talkies became a thing, that stage actresses were being pursued more and more to appear in movies because they could speak. And she says, real actresses don't make films. Anyway, so she's like the toast of the town, famous stage actress. She has an affair with a very young, cute boy. And then he starts taking up with the young ingenue in her play. So the fact that she's playing the older woman in this play with the younger lady played by the delightful Lucy Punch. And then also at the same time, being made to feel old by the fact that, he's a more appropriate sexual choice, or she's a more appropriate sexual choice for him than this older woman, brings her to the point that she has a rather unprofessional meltdown on stage. And then at the end, spoiler alert, realizes that it's actually okay, that it's okay to leave young people to everything that's terrible about being young, to appreciate what there is to be about being older, and that, ultimately we're going to be okay. And I think that despite the fact that this movie has so little in common in any other way with While We're Young, I think that it's a good double bill pairing in terms of continuing that theme in a different way.
Nice. That is a movie I remember coming out because I believe that was the second time that Annette Bening lost to
Hilary Swank. That's right. Yeah.
Actress, right?
Yeah, that's right.
But I've not actually seen the movie.
It's delightful. It's also Canadian, so you'll be getting brownie points for that if you Canadian enough to be nominated for a Genie Award anyway.
Hey, then it counts. Yeah. Okay, well, my double bill pairing is, we sort of mentioned it a few times already, the sort of similarities in the contemporariness of Noah Baumbach with Wes Anderson, and me being the Wes Anderson fanboy that I am going to go with the Darjeeling Limited, which probably is in my trio of favorite movies with Life Aquatic and Fantastic Mr. Fox, the two that Baumbach co-wrote. And I feel like Darjeeling has Wes Anderson, he's far more cynical earlier in his career, but, post mainstream breakout, this is probably one of his more cynical outings. And personally, I don't think he has reached the same highs that he has reached after Darjeeling. Nothing has really sort of come close to his earlier work. And I love the comedy in that movie. And, it's about three men kind of also grappling with, their daddy issues, but also getting older and being Arrested Development, acting like children the whole time, because anytime you're around your siblings, you sort of revert back to acting childlike. So there's some, some thematic similarities there, but that's sort of about it, other than the fact that they're also, the movie sort of takes place in New York as well, which is, very Wes Anderson in a nutshell as well.
Part of it, yeah. I love that film. That's also one of my favorite Wes Anderson movies, and it seems to be the one that people miss the boat on the most. Like, I remember it did not do well. It left theaters very quickly, and a lot of people talk about it in this really derogatory way, to the point that people will make fun of me for liking it. And having been made fun of since I was a child, I can't say that I care, but I find it interesting that like people have actually been quite rude to me about my love of that film. But well, I don't know. People just feel comfortable saying anything to me, probably because I'm shitty to them too. But no, I love that film. I feel like it does touch some very poignant emotional chords. Plus, it's so beautiful. I think it's one of Bob Yeoman's.
It's probably his most beautiful film.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably Grand Budapest, matches it, if not surpasses it, for dazzling images and the colors and everything. But the fact that he makes India such this brilliant color palette while also being a real place. I think it's also the last time Angelica is on screen in one of his films, and she's one of my all-time heroes. And so her ongoing collaboration with him is something that I always loved about his films, and I'm really sorry that it doesn't seem to have continued since. although she has done voice work in his films since. I think he actually meant for her to be the mother in Fantastic Mr. Fox, but that was around the time that that her husband died. I think that's why she's not involved.
It went
in
to Meryl?
Yes, yeah. I think, but I could be wrong. And then she hasn't, again, I don't think she's been on screen for him since. But
yeah, looking up her filmography, yeah, she's in both Fantastic Mr. Fox and Isle of Dogs. Just Isle of Dogs, and in the French Dispatch as a narrator.
She narrates, I think I think she narrates the eulogy at the end, something like that. I always know her voice as soon as I hear it. I'm really keyed into Angelica Houston, and also she has a very distinct voice, so it's not that hard. So, and I love the way she shows up at the end, to really put that final note on it. No, not the very end, but that, when she does finally appear. That movie is also deeply inspired by Black Narcissus, which is like one of my top 10 favorite movies of all time. So that callback to it, I really like. So yeah, I love the Darjeeling Limited.
I'm glad we're on the same page as that, because it's definitely one that seems to be very overlooked, often mocked, or just straight up ignored. Like it seems to just not be in the conversation as far as his legacy at all.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I also wonder, was there an issue with like the time that they released it? Was there something that the distributor? Because I just feel like, aside from the fact that it wasn't that appreciated, it also just didn't have the fanfare. Because I think that Life Aquatic is one of his weaker films. I know a lot of people love it. The reaction to that movie was very mixed critically, but I also remember that when it came out, it was a huge deal. Like, you couldn't avoid it. And I didn't have to, I saw it in my neighborhood movie theater. While as the Darjeeling, I had to go down to the Cumberland to see it. It's also one of the last times I remember going to the Cumberland before it closed. And I have a very distinct memory of enjoying watching that movie on a late show, practically alone in the theater.
That sounds like an amazing memory.
It is. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know, like having, as I'm sure you know, I go to the movies a lot, and especially pre-pandemic, I used to go a lot. So if I remember the event of seeing it, it's something special about that. Yeah.
Nice. Okay, well, let's move on to our second game, and that is Would You Rather. So, Bill, what would you rather question do you have for me?
All right. So it's lockdown. You're stuck in a room for, let's say, 6 months. Would you rather be stuck listening the entire time to Amanda Seyfried's warbling falsetto in Les Mis, or Adam Driver's quote unquote stand-up comedy from Annette?
Oh boy. I, as someone who is an avid hater of the Les Mis movie, that's an instant knock on that. Oof. And yeah, Adam Driver's stand-up in Annette is not great. It almost seemed like they were just sort of going for a modern Andrew Dice Clay sort of vibe, but also an anti-joke sort of thing, whereas punchlines aren't really punchlines.
Yeah. It's one of those things where I think it was supposed to be terrible within the world of not within the world of the film, but for us watching it. But then it also just went on too long, so that even though I got the joke, I was like, okay, we need to move on from this. This is really driving me crazy. Although I like that film.
Oh, yeah, that was a film I was also sort of mixed on.
No, I saw it with a very dear friend of mine who was really not liking it. Like he was really not liking it, and I was very surprised because I enjoyed it, even though I didn't think it was flawless. So.
The best thing about the movie for me was the opening song.
Oh, yeah, I could see that.
And then it all went downhill.
Well, my friend Greg loved Simon Helberg the most. He thought that was like the highlight of the film for him. Is that his name?
Yeah. Yeah, no. He was fine. I don't know. I guess it's just hard to take Simon Helberg seriously in literally anything he does, because he's just the guy from Big Bang Theory.
Well, and also he recently got his teeth completely redone. I don't know if you saw that movie he was in that Mayim Bialik directed, which are not words I ever expected to say out loud. But he has these like brilliant new shiny white teeth that you could follow him in a blackout. Like, they're so bright. So he can't play anyone who's not rich because they're so obvious, and it's very distracting. I don't remember if that was already the case in this movie, but it was the last time I saw him in anything. Because, all the cast members of that show have more money than they know what to do with. So they're just finding new ways to spend it.
Yeah. The only time I've liked him in something was in Florence Foster Jenkins as the piano accompanist.
I don't remember him making an impression on me in that film, but I was disappointed with that film overall. So,
it was not a good movie. Although it did sort of reaffirm my new appreciation for Hugh Grant.
Yeah, he's actually the takeaway from that movie, as much as I am as big a Meryl head as any film lover should be. But at that point, you really have established her as sort of being in drag as herself. And Hugh Grant gives the much more affecting performance. But you're avoiding making a choice, Dakota. So
I am avoiding making a choice. I didn't think you'd realize that. Just because of my pure white hot hatred towards the Les Mis movie, I'm gonna have to say Adam Driver and Annette.
I didn't realize I made such a tough call, but yeah.
That's a tough one because they're both equally terrible options.
I actually liked that movie only because I didn't care that it's not as good as the play. I think that's one of the most marvelous musicals ever made, and I just don't care that the movie's not as good. I just enjoyed that. I think the music in that musical is so beautiful. It's hard to ruin it, although they tried real hard. And there's a lot of people we know that Russell Crowe sucks in it, but there's people in that movie who are good singers who don't sound good, and Amanda Seyfried was one of them for me, which is that I know she can sing, but there's something about the pitch that her singing is at that I was like, once she started singing, I was like, oh my God, is that what I have to listen to? Jesus.
Okay, so then flipping it around, what's your answer for your own question?
Oh wow, I never thought about having to make a choice.
Oh, you have to answer it too.
Yeah, no, I would probably pick Adam Driver as well, just because it would probably be easier to tune out. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, fair enough. All right, so my question is, Naomi Watts' character, she works as a producer for her father's documentaries, and she had offered to work with her husband, who turned her down. But that said, in the real world, Bill, if you had to choose, who would you rather work for, your parent or your partner?
Well, thank you for thinking I could ever have a partner, because at this age, it's not looking likely. But it's another sad note of my life to add to this show. When I do have anyone that I'm seeing, I sort of enjoy the struggle. I don't chase drama or anything. I'm not someone who's going to pick fights for no reasons. And I'm not like possessive or jealous, but I do enjoy the process of hashing it out with somebody as part of the way of getting to know them. While as I have a very difficult relationship with my parents, who are two people that I love very much and I don't like at all. So I think that's an easy call for me. I would much rather be stuck fighting in an editing booth with a partner than with my parents, because, there's makeup sex involved. I don't know. Maybe some people have makeup sex with their parents too. I don't want to judge.
Oh God.
That's a terrible thing to say. I really do push to past the limit, don't I? No, but, I don't, I would not enjoy, having that. I keep my parents out of my professional life completely, other than the fact that, for as long as they were well enough to do so, they would come to see my performances and stuff like that. But I don't get into the weeds of it with them. So yeah, it would definitely be the partner.
Fair enough. And I'm on the exact same page as you, where, I feel it would be easier to have an argument with a partner and not have feelings hurt than it is with a parent.
Yeah, because everything, like every critical thing they say leads you back to a childhood memory that then you will either hold against them or stew on. You know what I mean? Like it's not. I don't know. Parents are a complicated relationship. I think everybody loves their parents and doesn't really want to get to know them all that well. When people tell me that their parents are their best friends, I'm like, oh, there's something wrong with you, to put it mildly.
Well, Bill, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show today. It's always a pleasure. So thank you so much. But where can people find you and your work? And is there anything you wish to promote?
Well, thank you again for having me. Like I said, it's such a delight, and I will always say yes. So, thank you for having me on. People can find me on the socials just at Bil Antoniou. I spell my first name with one L. So on Twitter and Instagram at Bil Antoniou, where I just share my, I put recommendations of movies I think people should see on Instagram. And then listen to my podcast, badgaymovies.com, and then Bad Gay Movies wherever you find podcasts. And that's it. I'm in a workshop of a show coming up in a couple weeks. in a musical of the Legend of Louis Pasteur. This might drop after that, so I don't know. But there's that. But other than that, I don't really have any other artistic pursuits on the horizon. Oh, and also That Shelf, of course. I'm always so thrilled when you guys promote it, and then I forget to. On thatshelf.com, I do write, as you mentioned earlier, the Criterion Shelf. Once a month, I pick a collection on that streaming service and go through the films in it and basically rate them in order of what I recommend and what I don't. And then other writers on that shelf, including yourself and Rachel, contribute blurbs as well. So I don't have to write them all, even though I do watch all of the films, just so you know.
I know you're absolutely crazy. Rachel and I have had that discussion a few times of how crazy you are with
it's not crazy. It's that some people have things come up at the last minute and aren't able to submit a blurb. So I need to be prepared for that in case you all die, or join some kind of suicide cult right before deadline. I need to be prepared. So it's just my way of covering my ass. And also because I usually choose a collection where I want to watch everything. Do you think Criterion has ever retweeted or even liked, let alone a thank you for me promoting their channel while getting nothing for free? Just airing that one out there too, while we're going over our grievances with family and the like. But I'm happy to do it all the same.
Well, I will make sure to link to the latest Criterion Shelf article that you wrote, along with all the other links to your work that people can find and follow you. And people definitely need to be listening to Bad Gay Movies because it is one of the funniest podcasts I've ever listened to.
Well, we have a really, really good time doing it. This past February was our 10-year anniversary. So we clearly enjoy doing it because it hasn't made us rich, but we never seem to want to stop. So.
Well, you can follow this show on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at contrazoompod. If you have seen While We're Young, let us know your thoughts. Send an email to contrazoompod@gmail.com. Thank you to Eric and Kevin Smale for the theme music and to Stephanie Pryor for the logo design. If you like to listen to podcasts on YouTube, we do post all episodes there as well. And if you really like the show, consider tipping us on coffee. Thanks for checking us out.